Good morning, everyone. I think, yeah, looks like I can be heard. Good. Um, this is Kurt speaking to you from Rockville, Maryland. I did not see the Aurora Borealis this weekend, missed it. Although some people, it was visible in this area. I did see a fireball that is a disintegrating meteor that was entering the Earth's atmosphere a couple of weeks ago. And I wondered, did anyone else see that? And I actually found there's a website, the American Meteor Society has a really good website for reporting sightings of meteors and fireballs, and it's a really they walk you through, giving all the details that they need for analyzing the event, and then they can correlate it with other reports. And so there were about 50 other people who saw the same thing that I saw, which was kind of interesting experience. If you see something that's unusual and very fleeting, you can actually, did I really see that? Did that really happen? If you tell somebody else, if somebody tells me, oh, I saw whatever, and you think, did they really see that? Or did they just imagine that? So which is somewhat related to what I want to talk about, which is a particular practice called the Great Dharani, or Shinmyo Janggu De Dharani. And I'll talk a little bit about the title of it. It's a mantra, or a Dharani, that Zen Master Sahn encouraged everyone to practice. And of course, it's not something that Zen Master Seung just thought up. It was a practice that he learned. And he saw some things from his practice of the Great Dharani. And he had experiences. In fact, he had his great awakening experience while still a very young man, while doing a retreat in which for 100 days he did nothing but recite the Great Dharani. So the retreat had very strict rules. It's a solitary retreat. He had to chant the Great Dharani 20 hours a day, every day, for 100 days. And the only thing he could drink was water straight out of a nearby stream. And the only thing he could eat was pine needles, which have very, very little, if any, nutritional value. But he could he could grind the pine needles up to make like a powder, or mix them with water even to make it like a paste, but which makes it, I guess, a little more possible to digest some nutrition out of it. I don't know. It's said that I don't know if it's said of him, but the other people have done this as a kind of extreme ascetic practice of just living off of eating pine needles. And at least in some cases, it's said that a person's skin will turn green from the chlorophyll in the pine needles. And so that was how. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that particular practice that Zen Master Seung Sahn did. And he didn't go around telling other people to do it either. He talked about his experience doing it. And actually, he said that when when this practice was described to him, he was told that one of three things will happen if you do this. If you chant the Great Dharani for 20 hours a day for 100 days straight, and only drink pure water from a nearby stream, and only eat pine needles, one of three things will happen. You will die, you will go insane, or you will become enlightened. He didn't die. We know that. He lived for many, many, many decades to come. And he did have a great awakening experience. And so, having had a great awakening experience, the big challenge that faced him for the rest of his life is what to do with that. How to share that, how to share that with others. And so he did encourage people to recite the Great Dharani, and he himself continued to recite the Great Dharani for the rest of his life. So Dharani is a Sanskrit term, and you can get very bogged down in the precise definition. Actually, there's many different, well, at least a few different definitions of Dharani. But in this particular context, in the context of this particular Dharani, the Great Dharani, it's more or less the same as a mantra. And that is how Zen Master Seung practiced it and taught it as a practice, as a practice to say. Even if you do it, you can do it silently. So this is his main practice. Zen Master Seung-san's main practice was to always be reciting the Great Dharani in his mind. And of course, he would also recite it out loud as well, but which is, especially if you want to learn the Great Dharani, it's a little long, but with if you repeat it enough times, you will eventually learn it, and that's the best way to learn it. But yeah, so Zen Master Seung-san had this, was given this kind of retreat that he could do, which involved reciting the Great Dharani. But the Great Dharani, and of course he went on and he taught people to do the Great Dharani without encouraging others to necessarily do the same kind of extreme practice that he had done. Although he encouraged people to push themselves and to always push themselves. Hard practice was a big theme of Zen Master Seung-san's teaching. But he did encourage people to learn and recite the Great Dharani. But I was talking about what does Dharani mean, and so actually the literal meaning of the word Dharani in Sanskrit is to hold something, and this is really a way of describing the practice itself. To repeat a Dharani over and over and over again is to hold it. So holding the Dharani is to hold it in your mind, you could say. And the title of the Great Dharani, so we call it the Great Dharani. It turns out that for example, in the Medicine Buddha Sutra, it's recounted how when the Medicine Buddha became enlightened, when he attained his great awakening, one of the things that he attained in the process of his great awakening was a Dharani, and it's in the Medicine Buddha Sutra it's referred to as the Great Dharani. So Great Dharani is kind of a generic term that can be applied to any Dharani that is great. But the full title of the Great Dharani is the Shin-myo Jang-gu De Dharani. And so typically when people chant the Great Dharani, or at least the way I was taught to chant it, you chant the title as the first line of the Dharani, Shin-myo Jang-gu De Dharani. Namo Ra Dana Dana Raya Namakariya Baro Gije Sevaraya Oji Sarabaya Mo Mahasarabaya Mahagara Nikaya. And Shin-myo is an interesting word. It's a compound word. So Shin in Shin-myo Jang-gu De Dharani, Shin here is the same Shin as in the Japanese word Shinto. Shinto, if you've heard of Shinto, which is a very important part of a Japanese culture. Usually it's translated into English as something like the way of the gods. Shin being, so Shin has many different ways of translating it into English. It's actually in the Heart Sutra. Towards the very end of the Heart Sutra, Shin shows up as well. When we say that the Heart Sutra mantra is the great transcendent mantra, in one of the English translations of the Heart Sutra, the phrase "great transcendent mantra," this word transcendent is Shin, the same Shin. So it means something that's transcendent, but also very powerful. And power or powerful is an important part of the meaning of the word Shin. Myo, so Shin Myo, the Myo part of Shin Myo means something that is very subtle and mysterious. So Shin Myo in the title of the Great Dharani means something that's very powerful, very mysterious, transcendent, maybe divine. Supernatural is another word that is often used to translate Shin. So when you put them together, Shin Myo, a lot of times people just translate it as wondrous, marvelous, whatever those words mean. Jang-gu, we say Shin Myo Jang-gu De Dharani. Jang-gu just means phrases, or actually, so Shin-myo is a word that people use in modern everyday speech, but if they're referring to something that is really wild and wondrous and amazing. Jang-gu is also a word from modern vernacular speech, which can refer to paragraphs and sentences. So in the Shin-myo Jang-gu De Dharani, it just means the phrase. So it's the wondrous, subtle phrases, and then De, it means great, and Dharani means Dharani. So Shin-myo Jang-gu De Dharani means the Dharani of wondrous and subtle phrases. The practice of reciting or holding the Great Dharani is actually one of the most popular practices throughout East Asia. And sometimes the way that modern Western Buddhists, sometimes referred to as convert Buddhists, people who did not grow up as Buddhists, whose parents were not necessarily Buddhists. If you grow up in you could be if you're Chinese-American or Japanese-American or Laotian American or Cambodian American, you might grow up in a household where Buddhism is part of your family life. There might be a little shrine or altar somewhere in your house. There might be books on Buddhism around. But I didn't grow up like that. I wasn't raised Buddhist. I became a Buddhist later in life, which is very common for modern Western Buddhists. There's in the Washington, D.C. area where I live, there are a lot of Buddhist temples. There's a huge, beautiful Cambodian Buddhist temple just a few miles from where I live. But if you go there, everything's in Cambodian, right? There are Laotian Buddhist temples in this area. If you go there, everything is in Laotian. If you go to a meditation group or a temple or a center that is run by and mostly, mostly something that is being run by and done by modern Western convert Buddhists, then everything's going to be in English, or it could be in Spanish if they happen to be Spanish speaking. Whatever their native language is, things will be in that language. Although, if you go to that Cambodian Buddhist temple, everything's in Cambodian except for the chanting. The chanting is done in Pali because they're Theravada Buddhists and they chant in Pali. Anyway, so sometimes there can be a disconnect between people who, modern Western people who became Buddhists later in life and who don't come from a Buddhist culture, who weren't raised in a Buddhist family. There can be a disconnect between what I do or what I think of as practice or meditation or Buddhism, and what someone who was born and raised in a Buddhist culture might think of. There could be a disconnect, and sometimes the two look at each other and say, "Oh, you're not doing that right." There can be a tendency for modern Western Buddhists to look at traditional Buddhists as done by people who are born and raised in a Buddhist culture and think, well, people think all kinds of things, right? And the same thing can happen the other way. People who are born and raised in a Buddhist culture can look at someone like me and say, sometimes there's a tendency for people who are from more traditional Buddhist culture to think of what I do as, it's just hippie Buddhism. It's just some idea that they had. They, read some books about Buddhism, and this is the idea that they have. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because if you recite the Great Dharani, then you are doing something that is very much a part of traditional popular Buddhism. So popular in the sense of that people like it. It's popular in the sense that it's popular, that people like it, but it's also popular in the sense that it's part of the Buddhism of the people, common ordinary people with jobs and families and husbands and wives and children and people who go to school, people who go to work. Normal people, one might say, as opposed to, Buddhist monks and nuns or priests or scholars or whatever. Ordinary Buddhists love to recite the Great Dharani. And very often, people who recite the Great Dharani report that it helps them in their life. And this is one of the reasons for its popularity. If you go back to the Tang dynasty in China, well over 1,000 years ago, the Great Dharani was already very, very popular at that time, and we know that because the sutra that the Great Dharani comes from was translated many times, maybe almost as many as 20 different times, which is a sign of the great interest that people had in this Dharani. The Dharani is taught in the sutra, which is just called the Great Dharani Sutra. In fact, if you if you Google the Great Dharani Sutra, you'll find this sutra. You can read an English translation of it. It's not that long. it's quite interesting to read. But um, the, the reason why I brought it up is because we know just from the number of translations of that sutra that it was already very, very popular among people um, uh, well over 1,000 years ago in China. And from China, it spread to, um, first of all over China, but also to Korea and Vietnam and Japan, where people also chanted. If you go to a Vietnamese Buddhist temple or a Japanese Buddhist temple, they will be chanting the Great Dharani as part of their practice. And of course, if you go to a Korean Buddhist temple or just a sitting group, meditation group, that's in the, especially if it's in the lineage of Zen Master Seung, but not even, it wasn't something that was in any way unique to Zen Master Seung. It's a very widespread practice, but what was unique about Zen Master Seung was the emphasis that he placed upon this particular practice. And it's definitely one of the most important contributions that he made to the spread of the Dharma in the West, was this emphasis that he placed on the practice of reciting the Great Dharani. So one of the reasons why it's a popular practice is because people really feel that it helps them. And if you chant the Great Dharani, and if you feel something, it's a lot like seeing a fireball in the sky. What was that? If you have any kind of benefit or positive reinforcement from your practice, whether you do meditation practice or chanting meditation, or any other kind of practice, my opinion is that everybody who does any kind of meditation practice or chanting practice gets some benefit from it. And it's pretty reliable. It's like exercise. If you exercise, it will help your body. If you read a lot, it will help your mind. Certain things are pretty reliable. Now, some people read a lot, and if you talk to them, you can say that person reads too much, or some people exercise a lot, and you can hurt yourself exercising, or you can just become a fanatic about it. You can do it wrong. That doesn't mean that the practice itself isn't reliable. But if you, if you hold the Great Dharani, then this is a wonderful way to connect with a particular lineage, which is Zen Master Seung San's Dharma lineage, his Dharma family. It's also a wonderful way to connect with literally millions and millions of Buddhists throughout the world who all practice this holding of the Great Dharani. And it's a way of connecting with people who have been practicing this for centuries and centuries across cultures. Like I said, if you go to a Cambodian Buddhist temple, they will be everything will be in Cambodian, but when they chant, it will be in Pali. And so the Pali chanting unites Theravada Buddhists, regardless of what their native language is. And the chanting, the Great Dharani, is Sanskrit, and that unites people regardless of it. It goes beyond your own culture, your own background, your own, sense of Western, Eastern, modern, traditional, whatever. Anyway, so Shinmyo Janggu De Dharani, is a wonderful practice, and I encourage it from my own personal experience. And thank you for listening.